This entire video is one cohesive narrative, but if you just want to hear one particular thing, here are some timestamps for when I talk about those really specific things. Part 1, thoughts on my latest video and channel considerations. The funny thing is, when I released the video, I really didn't expect anybody to watch it. I assumed it was just going to do worse than my other videos usually do. I thought maybe some of my regular viewers might come back to watch it, but others would probably assume my channel was dead, they would probably unsubscribe, and I'd probably get a few hundred views max. I'm not exactly sure what happened. I assume YouTube decided to promote the video in some way. So on one hand, I'm happy that I was able to receive some attention because I was so sure that I was shadow banned. Also, if you're a new subscriber, thank you very much for subscribing. But on the other hand, it's a little regrettable, or maybe I should say I feel very disappointed about the result. I stand behind everything that I said in the video, including the way that I said it. Obviously, if you use someone's face in a thumbnail, people who know that person and who are interested in that person are more likely to click on it. But this isn't the first time I've made content related to Alex or with his name or face either in the title or thumbnail, and those videos didn't do so well, so even still, I didn't expect it to get much attention from his audience. I like productive conversations and I like constructive criticism. I would assume that fans of Alex's channel or people who are sympathetic to veganism and vegans themselves would be interested in these things as well. Unfortunately, a lot of the comments I received were from people who came in with an assumption that they didn't bother to verify, meaning they didn't actually engage with my content, just assumed that I was trolling and let their fantasy become truth for them in their own mind. Nothing I can do about that. I always appreciate engagement. There are also comments from people, whether they were really thoughtful and useful or not, that made it clear that they completely missed the entire point of the video. People who just wanted to defend Alex or to defend veganism itself. So as such, the most regrettable thing is that this particular video, pinpointing one very particular way that I felt about the actions of one particular vegan, as opposed to me presenting a well-rounded argument against the vegan diet altogether, is not my most popular video. And sadly, there are so few comments of value or worth for anybody participating in this discussion. There are some things I've been considering over time. One of the reasons why it took me so long to produce content again was because I was thinking about what direction I wanted to take the channel in. If I wanted to rebrand, if I wanted to rethink how I was doing things. So at least in terms of that, I did get some feedback that I thought was helpful and useful. People come to my channel assuming that I'm making informative videos that are meant to teach people something, but that's not what the purpose of my channel is. Perhaps I haven't done a good enough job making things clear, so a channel introduction would be better, so that at least there's something that people can reasonably be expected to check, so that they're not left to make baseless assumptions. If I really want to reach people, I should minimize to a reasonable extent the things that immediately turn them off from the channel. I don't plan to change my channel name though, because it is tongue-in-cheek, and as far as I'm concerned, it should be used to spark discussion. It also became clear to me that because I typically make videos for my regular viewers, they already know where I'm coming from, and I tend to not elaborate on certain points that are important to elaborate on because I don't want my content to become repetitive. On the other hand, I try to keep my content short enough so that people can binge videos one after the other, and I pretty much laid out everything in those other videos. I tried to make it as obvious as possible that they're part of a series, that they're not necessarily meant to be taken as individual unrelated points. But perhaps it's something that I'll have to start doing so that no matter who watches my videos moving forward, they'll have a better understanding of why I say what I say. I have to remember that the average person is intellectually lazy, and they expect people to do all the work for them. The original purpose of this channel was to get people curious and to get people to think deeper, and to get people to actually look at the information that is provided to them and not take it at face value. It is also meant to get people to understand why it's important to question science even when it's presented well. I have a video coming out about that. It's in the works, but it's very involved, so it's taking time. There is one very important thing I'd like to highlight though. I've been in this comment thread with this one poster. I don't really like long and involved threads, but there was a part of me that thought that there was some hope in communicating with this person. This channel is about activism after all, so the time investment should be worth it. However, I also consider that people read comments, but the longer the thread, the less likely people are to actually read it. So once a thread starts to get very long, I try to break it off. However, this one just kept going on, and it was difficult for me to find the point in which I could definitively write the person off. So I'd like to go through that right now in this video. I also hope that this serves as a reminder to people who follow me, and as a good summary for people who are new to the channel of what my point of view is and why. Part 2. Why do I assert that veganism fails on the nutrition aspect? Throughout the conversation, I was asked a number of questions that are related, but not always asking the same thing. As an FYI, at one point we had more than one thread going at once, so if it sometimes looks like we're not responding to each other properly, that would be the reason why. The full thread should still be available for anyone who wants to read it, and if not, I've saved it so I can post it. Why don't you try substantiating that a vegan diet can't give you the necessary vitamins before you confidently make that claim over and over? Could you please link me the research which says that a vegan lifestyle requires supplementation? I don't want to come off as rude or anything like that, but evidence like that is usually required to make statements of that kind. For example, even if someone were to prove that B12, omega-3, calcium, zinc, iron, and magnesium deficiencies in a vegan diet were significant, which has not yet been proven, then couldn't vegans just take supplements to counteract that? The basic question that this person has is, why do I say it's difficult for vegans to get the proper nutrition they need through supplements? This is a valid question and one that I tried to unpack for this person, but it's a really long and involved thought process that seems impossible to relay to certain people. I doubt that this person is the only person that's having this difficulty, so this is not just for them. What they're apparently expecting is for me to give them some kind of paper or research that says that vegans cannot get the nutrition they need without supplementation. At the very least, some research saying that they have more difficulty than non-vegan populations to make use of those supplements would be sufficient. I'm going to say a bunch of things that I don't believe need backing up with some kind of research because they are widely accepted by both sides of the aisle. They serve as a good foundation to the answers to the poster's questions. I'll make it as 1, 2, 3, ABC as I have to for those of you at the back of the class. Humans are living things. Living things have requirements for sustaining that state of living. One of these things is the acquisition of proper nutrition. There are basic nutrients that every single human being needs, the absence of which will lead to health failure. The whole of nutrition a human requires in order to subsist on planet Earth can be found in the animal kingdom. The whole of nutrition a human requires in order to subsist on planet Earth cannot be found naturally in the plant kingdom. This is one place where I assume some people who have not done even a cursory amount of research into this field of discussion may have some questions. Even a basic Google search will give you some useful information to start your investigation with. I'm not responsible for another person's intellectual laziness, and a person's personal incredulity is not answerable here. Disclaimer, I don't actually recommend anybody do what I'm about to say. This is just rhetorical. I would like to encourage anyone who questions this to try a pure, whole foods vegan diet with no supplementation and then get back to me. As it turns out, you don't need a doctor to tell you. You don't need science to tell you. You can prove it to yourself. On to the next point of the thought process. Vegans refuse to eat animal products. I will elaborate here again because I assume there will be some people for whom it's still not sinking in. A vegan diet specifically excludes animal products. Even if there are people who cheat and have some cheese or fish every once in a while, this is not what they're advocating for, this is not what they're aiming for, and this is not what scientists test for, or else it should not be, when we do try to get any hypothesis proven regarding the vegan diet and its effect on people. And so I'm not referring to a diet that includes animal products at all when I say vegan diet. Back to the thought process. This means they are relying on plants to try to sustain their life. Since plants do not have all the nutrition that they require, this means they require supplementation. I hope this answers the first question. Again, you don't need much of anything else other than a modicum of common sense to understand that. You do not have to sit around and wait for a scientist or a researcher or a plant-based ideologue to tell you how to think. You are perfectly capable of making these simple connections on your own. Even if someone was to produce a paper that said so, it would be their opinion until it was actually demonstrated to be reality. This is why I say, rhetorically, for you to try it yourself, because that is what the scientific method is all about. But hold on, why do I say it's just an opinion? There's so much evidence saying that a vegan diet is good for people, isn't there? There's so much evidence saying that eating too much red meat, for example, is so bad for your health, isn't there? Surely you could find evidence to back up what you're saying as well, right? That vegans have a hard time actually absorbing vitamins as taken through supplementation? Okay, here's the second thought process we need to go through step by step. We're starting with the premise that vegans require supplementation based on the conclusion from the prior thought process. In science, we start with a question, and we employ different methods to try to reach a conclusion about what the answer to that question is. In some fields of science, this is more easily said than done, especially because of our inability to control confounding factors. In nutrition science, basically, you are testing the open, dynamic system that is a human being. We are all very different despite being of the same species, which means there are a host of confounding factors. There are many confounding factors to every aspect of life. including nutrition. In order to be able to do the research required to causatively prove the effect of any of these factors on the outcome of health in relation to nutrition, we would need to do proper experiments controlling for all confounding factors. This is impossible, and therefore, we cannot prove causation for any given factor in relation to nutrition for any single human being. And here, I can imagine some people really wondering why I would say that. How could it be impossible? Let's look at what we would need to do, keeping in mind that this list does not include everything. Lock genetically similar people in a lab for their entire lifespan. Control every single aspect of their life, including but not limited to how much sleep they get, how they sleep, where they sleep, when they sleep, how much exercise they get, what kind of exercise they do, how they do those exercises, how much they eat, what they eat, when they eat, how much socializing they do, and with whom, and how, and when, how often they sit, how often they stand, how long they're inside, how long they're outdoors, what kind of environment they will be exposed to if they are outdoors, what's in the air they breathe, the kind of bacteria they may have access to in things like soil, if they ever touch it, and if one person touches it, now we have to be sure that everybody touches it, how much exposure to sunlight they get, how much sex they have, who they have sex with. And speaking of sex, we would also need to verify the veracity of the vegan diet over generations. So we would have to force these people to procreate with each other, to produce offspring, and then force their offspring to reproduce with each other so that we can see how many generations these people could actually last. It would not do to take just anybody from the general population because that would introduce a host of confounding factors, and I hope I don't have to explain that. There are a host of other things I hope I don't have to explain because they should be understood through common sense, but let's go over them anyway just so that I make sure I'm crossing all my T's and dotting all my I's. If the genetically similar population does not represent the entire population, which it cannot, this experiment would need to be reproduced for every other type of genetically similar population until there's no type of human being that we haven't tested for. We would also have to consider different age ranges, but this could be done so long as we're testing multiple generations. There are many people in nutrition science who want to do particular experiments, but they can't get it past an ethics board. I hope you don't need scientific evidence to explain why and how we don't have the space to do the necessary experiments. We don't have the funds. And even if we ignored the ethics board and got many people to agree to do it and somehow found the space, somehow found the money, there's still the limitation of finding people who are genetically similar enough and maintaining the consent of all future generations who are undergoing this experiment. It wouldn't do if, in the end, only one or two of these experiments could actually be followed through, because it could not inform the human population as a whole on any hard health outcomes. Another thing we should all fully understand is that what works for one person is not necessarily what's going to work for other people. Also, if something doesn't work for someone, it doesn't mean that it's not going to work for someone else. In Alex's video, I'm sure this is what he was thinking when he was encouraging other people to continue to try a vegan diet or to not be discouraged from trying a vegan diet. So why should I go around discouraging people? Well, it all comes down to what my ultimate goal is, which is for people to be healthy and happy. I believe properly functioning societies are required for this. So what is something that is important for us to have properly functioning societies? Reasonable expectation. The main problem I have with this is that people don't have a realistic expectation that the diet is actually helpful. And this is for the aforementioned conclusion, which is that we cannot provide causation for any given factor in relation to nutrition for a human being. So actually, nobody really knows what the long-term effect of a vegan diet is. People form a hypothesis and they try to give that hypothesis, which is just an opinion or a guess, more credence than it actually has. If you would go so far as to say an anecdote is not evidence, neither is an opinion. Whenever somebody presents you with information, please make sure that you really check it carefully to see if the proper experiments were done, because I can guarantee you, based on what we've already discussed, that it wasn't, and whether or not it's the educated guess of people who are just putting the paper out there. In either case, there's no capital T truth here, and there should also be no double standards. Ultimately, when people cite nutrition science, no matter which side it falls on, we still have to verify it in some way, shape, or form. One common thing I notice with the general public is they tend to take vegans at their word. Throughout the conversation with this person, it became increasingly clear that they hadn't done even a rudimentary check into some of the information, because if they had, they wouldn't have been asking such simple questions as though I'm making something up instead of just actually stating a fact of life. Obviously, we understand these things because although there are limits to science, there are still some things we can take away from scientific research. It's not completely useless. So how do we know something as basic as humans require vitamins? We figured that out through trial and error, to be sure, but there's also a scientific reason why. How do we know whether or not vitamins are actually effective? It's the same thing. We figure it out through trial and error, and then we do research to try to figure out a scientific reason for why that is. We conduct research, which in the field of nutrition can only give us a hypothesis. Since we are unable to actually conduct the proper experiments, we have no choice but to observe people who engage in related behaviors, such as people adopting a vegan diet, and see what happens. Then we take note of what happens, and now we have a new question, and we can continue researching to try to get as close to the truth as we can. So, with the lack of scientific research in nutrition to give us definitive answers, why do I feel I can safely say that the vegan diet is bad for one's health? Well, luckily, for one, we can look elsewhere. There is a combination of fields of study that tell us a lot about human behaviors and how those have impacted us. As I mentioned in the original video, we have ever and still continue to have generations of people who are capable on surviving without or with very minimal plant products. We have more than enough proof that even an omnivorous diet allows for the continuation of our species. On the other hand, we have never seen generations of people who were capable of surviving on all plant products and no animal products, which is what veganism seeks to do. The next thing to look at is the efficacy of supplements, so we can answer the question of whether or not vegans are actually able to sustain their diet with supplements. It's important to point out that it's not widely disputed that vegans require supplementation. If after all this, you still feel you need some scientific evidence, and any paper will do, no matter how inconclusive it is, no matter how poorly the quote-unquote research behind it was conducted, no matter how biased it may be by the people who created the abstract or the conclusion, you can find plenty of evidence to this end. I admittedly became very frustrated with this poster, and was a little colorful in my language towards the end, but it's because they genuinely did ask me if I could prove that vegans require supplementation. But on to the next point. Part 3, the efficacy of supplements. The reasonable expectation for a response after I say that we've never seen generations of people surviving on an all-plant diet is that this is because we didn't have the proper supplementation available or the knowledge available for how we could make up for the lack of nutrition in a vegan diet. But now that we do, what's the problem? This is a fair point. Shouldn't the vegan diet be possible because we have a history of using supplements to abate health problems in people? And isn't that good enough? All right, so let's unpack this. Again, we will start with a few basic assumptions. There are bioavailable forms of nutrients and non-bioavailable forms of nutrients. Inherent in the name, bioavailable forms of nutrients are more easily absorbed in the human body than non-bioavailable forms. Not only is it true that the complete spectrum of nutrition required for people is found in the animal kingdom, the most bioavailable forms of nutrients are also found in the animal kingdom. If we take retinol and beta-carotene, for example, we find that retinol is much more readily accepted by the body, and that in the absence of retinol, but the presence of beta-carotene, some people, not all, may take beta-carotene and try to convert it into retinol. In this example of vitamin A, we have seen a situation in which it is possible for a vegan to not be able to get the proper vitamin A. Vegans seek to reduce animal exploitation, and we spoke before about how a vegan diet, if ever tested, should not include any animal forms of nutrition. It is reasonable to conclude that they would choose to consume foods with beta-carotene or else supplement with something that is not retinol, which cannot be found outside of an animal body. On one hand, it is true that just because it's not the bioavailable form doesn't mean that vegans can't reasonably meet their needs. So we would need to find evidence that they are not suffering from deficiencies of these key nutrients in the presence of the supplements. They admittedly tend to, though, and we do apply science and technology trying to help them avoid these problems. If they weren't having these problems, we would never need to worry about this. We would also need to not see improvement in their health, meaning the resolvement of these symptoms due to deficiencies, when they introduce animal products. They admittedly tend to see improvement, so this also fails in terms of erasing reasonable doubt that supplements work so well that we can say this diet is healthy. Let's talk about B12. Mainly, humans consume methylcobalamin and cyanocobalamin. Methylcobalamin is a type that is found in animal products, and it is the most bioavailable form for humans. The same as with vitamin A. If a vegan is truly seeking to reduce exploitation as much as possible, then they would take the non-bioavailable form. There are risks to not getting enough B12. General symptoms of vitamin B deficiency can include feeling very weak or tired, experiencing nausea, vomiting or diarrhea, not feeling as hungry as usual, weight loss, having a sore mouth or tongue, having yellowish skin. Neurological symptoms of vitamin B12 deficiency can include numbness or tingling in your hands and feet, vision problems, having a hard time remembering things or getting confused easily, having a difficult time walking or speaking like you usually do. If neurological problems from vitamin B12 deficiency develop, they may not be reversible. Psychological symptoms of vitamin B12 deficiency can include feeling depressed, feeling irritable, experiencing a change in the way you feel and behave. Can a vitamin B12 deficiency cause death? Untreated vitamin B deficiency can lead to severe neurological nervous system damage, which can put an individual at higher risk of mortality. Pernicious anemia, a deficiency in the production of red blood cells due to a lack of vitamin B12, can cause permanent neurological damage that can lead to death if it is untreated. Now, you may want to say that whether or not a person will experience these symptoms is obviously up to the person. Well, okay. There are a few more things that may need to be established that I thought that most people understood or believed or felt, but I see that I'm wrong. My understanding of a healthy diet is one that doesn't require supplementation. If your understanding of a healthy diet includes one that requires supplementation, we have a completely different understanding about what healthy means. We can go a step further and think about what kind of supplements are required. As far as I'm concerned, the risks of B12 are not acceptable. If you find them acceptable, again, we disagree on what should be considered acceptable or promoted as healthful. There's no more conversation to be had. If you decide to take the risk, congratulations. It's your life and you can mess it up as much as you want, however you want. But it's not healthful, and it should not be promoted as such. That was my main gripe in the original video. Finally, let's talk about anecdotes and why I doubly feel Alex was being irresponsible when trying to promote a vegan diet to people, even as he was suffering as much as he was from symptoms that can clearly be attributed to the consumption of fibrous materials, which are plants, and vitamin deficiencies, as stated above. Part 4. Why anecdotes matter. When science cannot give us a definitive conclusion, we have no choice but to rely on anecdotes. Perhaps Alex was in and out of the doctor's office, and his blood levels of B12 were fine, but he was clearly showing signs of deficiency. He mentioned that he felt better after he introduced some animal products. The reasonable conclusion is that he was able to get access to the bioavailable forms of things that he was missing. His body could absorb them and use them and start to function more efficiently. Let me be clear, when I say we're relying on anecdotes, I'm including the positive testimony as well as the neutral testimony and the negative testimony. If I hear that one of the main reasons behind people quitting the vegan diet is because of health problems, it raises a red flag. If I believe anything that they cite that says it should be the healthiest diet for people, why would so many people be experiencing health problems? I still need to verify this, so I engage with vegan content. I don't know any vegans personally, but for the average person, when we want to know if something works or doesn't work, we try to find evidence for it wherever we can, and one of those places is in people's testimony. It's not the end-all be-all, but it's a place to start. This is another thing that I want to make clear. You may have noticed that I keep compiling things more and more. I don't come to the conclusion that the vegan diet is bad for people because of one isolated thing. It's much more deep and involved than that, and I hope it is starting to become clear why I say what I say. After weighing the risks of the likely outcomes that the people around you experience, the final step to see if this can work for you or not is to actually try it yourself. If you try it and you can somehow make it work for you, congratulations, you are in the minority. The reasonable expectation for the majority of people on the planet, though, is that it is impossible to maintain. The risks are too great, and we should not be encouraging such dangerous behavior amongst each other, not in a healthy, functioning society, and especially not if we care about animals and want to reduce animal suffering, because technically, humans are animals too. Fact of the matter is, Alex admitted to having problems. Plenty of vegans have admitted to having problems, and those problems can be attributed to a lack of proper nutrition. Once they had access to proper nutrition again, the problems abated. We cannot prove causation, which at this point should go without saying. So if we're always relying on correlations, why are the positive correlations that are limited and few and far between more answerable here than the negative correlations, which make up the majority? Conclusion. I do not know how much more simple I can make this. The main takeaways I hope for people to have are: take nutrition research, no matter what kind it is, with a grain of salt. Understand that correlation doesn't equal causation, but in the case of nutrition science, since causation is impossible for us to determine, we have to have a reasonable expectation of our behaviors based on what we can observe, which boils down to anecdotes. Before considering taking on a vegan diet, please weigh the risks and make an informed decision. Actually have proof that a vegan diet is healthful before you promote it to people or suggest that people do it, and do something about your expectation for people to just believe the unfounded statement that it is healthful, even in the face of health failure of the majority of the people who try the diet. Thank you so much for watching. If you still have remaining questions or concerns, you are welcome to leave them in the comments, but if it requires a lengthy response, be prepared to be featured in a video in the future. As always, be having a good day.